So I am looking at the clock and I see that we have just like 1 more minute. So I do want to give that 1 more minute for anyone who might be joining us from another presentation. For those of you that are coming into the room, this is the Family Feud, defining family as a means to develop supportive relationships. It will be presented by myself, Dr. Crowley, and as well as Ash Johnson. So as we get started here, one of the first things I'd like to do is just take a moment to introduce ourselves and tell you a little bit about why this topic is one that we wanted to present on. So I am Dr. Amy Crowley. I am a faculty member here in the CMHC online program. This particular topic is important to me as I've learned over the years that there is a difference between what society may view as family and what I may consider family. I will share a little bit throughout the presentation about how this came to light, as well as provide some examples for you. Ash, would you like to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Ash Johnston. I am a student here at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology online program. And like Dr. Crowley was saying, I'm really excited about this particular topic because I feel like family is something that is the cornerstone of a society, but at the same time, it's something that cannot be clearly defined. I don't feel like there's one straightforward definition of what makes a family a family. So I've always found it interesting that it's something that's so important to a functioning society, but at the same time, there's not a universal sort of definition that can be used to define what it means to be family.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Dr. Crowley?
We are going. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, this is Dr. Stretch. We just want to make sure everybody remembers to turn their video on or to mute the video and audio as they are coming in and out, and just to help with the bandwidth.
Yes, thank you very much. We are going to just kind of pose a question for discussion and just kind of remind you guys that I can't see everyone. So if you have a response, please unmute yourself to respond, or you can type it in the chat box and I'll have Ash read it for me. But so the first question we want to kind of pose for some discussion is, I'd like to hear some thoughts on what you might think of or what comes to mind when you hear the word family.
Complex. Generational.
I'm sorry, if someone's talking, I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Generational.
Generational. Okay, excellent. Anyone else?
For me, it's also like adoption, I guess, from my perspective.
Okay, adoption might be in there.
Support system.
Great. Support system.
Conflict.
Conflict.
People who share the same culture and values and beliefs.
Okay, same culture, values, and beliefs. Any other thoughts?
I think a responsibility.
Good. All right. So a second question we would have would be, are there different types of families? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, there's like your nuclear family, extended family, family that comes from blood, family that comes through legal means.
Excellent. We have here on our initial slide a quote, and we actually have quite a few throughout the presentation. But this one sort of speaks to the kind of why behind what we're doing. And it says that family isn't always blood. It's the people in your life who want you in theirs, the ones that accept you for who you are, the ones who would do anything to see you smile and love you no matter what. So that's something that we want you to kind of keep in mind as we continue through our presentation. So our next slide is a little bit about what we're going to cover today. And so in today's presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about defining the family. We'll talk about how a family is defined and who gets to define it. We'll talk about the shifting of families, about how we'll talk about a shift in how family is viewed and constructed. We'll talk a little bit about heteronormative language. We're going to touch on some heteronormative language as it pertains to families and why this can be troubling. We're also going to talk a little bit about family of choice. We'll explore what this actually is and give you some detail. We'll spend a few minutes revisiting Maslow, a short review of Maslow's hierarchy and how it applies to this topic. We'll also talk about needing a family and discuss why one individual may need a family. And then finally, we're also going to touch on trauma and rejection and how a family can influence this.
I'm sorry, Dr. Crowley, if you're sharing your screen, I'm unable to see it.
Oh. Can anyone?
I didn't know if anyone else was having that problem.
I can't see it either.
Oh my goodness.
Me too.
Okay. Well, I apologize. I've been sitting here forwarding through a presentation that you can't even see. Is that better?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you for letting me know. So how do you, okay, I feel like there we go. So why is this important? This topic is important because there's more than one way to define what makes a family. And as clinicians, educators, and supervisors, it's important that we remain mindfully aware of the language we use and our assumptions regarding one's family. This is important because people choose families for many different reasons. People may choose a family because of strain in their family of origin, distance from their family of origin, or even trauma. This is important because sometimes it is healthier for clients to be close to a chosen family versus their family of origin. Some people find more love and acceptance in a family of choice, while others may rely on both their family of choice and their family of origin for support. And this is also important because creating an environment that encourages people to seek out familial bonds outside of their family of origin can promote overall client well-being. As professionals, we shift with the evolving concept of what makes a family and foster an environment that encourages clients to build a support network, one that creates for them what is necessary for them to be healthier overall. So how do you define family? Let's talk a little bit more about this. I know we kind of started talking about it in our intro, but what is family? What are the constructs you think of when it comes to family? So I know we had a mention of a nuclear family, extended family. What does a family look like when you try to define it?
I guess for me, it's relationships that evolve or sometimes devolve.
Excellent. Anyone else? Okay. Can we think about who makes up a family? How do we define the roles or the persons that are within a family?
I think in a traditional family, it's a mother, father, and children, but as a single parent, I know that's not true.
Excellent. Okay.
Family structure. I think a family structure is what you make it.
Okay. And you bring up a good point is, a mother, father, children are stereotypical husband, wife, mother, father, and 2.5 children isn't necessarily reflective of all family orientations. And you specifically mentioned single parent households. So at times there may be a mother figure or a father figure, but not necessarily both. What else does a family look like?
Well, you can have two dads, you can have two moms, you could have no parents but have siblings, or be adopted, or live with your grandparents and be raised by them, or your aunts and uncles.
Excellent. And I think that also kind of leads into the idea that in some cultures, it's very normal for multi-generations to live within the household, as well as extended family to live within the household. So we don't always just have two parents and their naturally born children living within the household with no others. So when we hear the word family, while we might be drawn to that nuclear picture of a family, for many individuals, that doesn't fit well with them. We also have inclusion of step parents, as well as we may have more than one family that is developed from our family of origin. So in the cases of two biological parents, adoptive parents, guardians that are no longer together and household split, an individual may grow up in a family where they have two different independent families based off their initial family unit. I also like to put foster families into this discussion, as foster families create a different type of family unit, whereas we may have parental figures within the home, but depending on the foster child, they may or may not identify those individuals as parents. They may see them more as guardians, or over time, their relationship with them may evolve, where initially they may see them as guardians and they may eventually reach a point where they see them as parents. So the next question on the slide is, who decides your family? So what are your thoughts on who gets to decide family, or how is a family unit decided according to our societal standards?
I think in society standards, it's what you're born into. But I was born in foster care, so I had multiple families. But
Absolutely. Yep.
in society, it's who you're born into, your mother, your father, your grandmother. But coming up in an African American family, you can have your neighbors, that's your auntie, or so I don't think there's no true definition to that.
I think you get to decide your family, but like the government can take over and they can say legally who's your family, or your actual family could decide who's your family, you know?
And I think that's a good point. We do have the Census Bureau, who works really hard to compartmentalize us all into these pretty little boxes, and oftentimes they'll determine family for you, or at least try to define your family for you. I also think that it's not just society standards, but I think it's also the way that we speak about relationships that we have, and the closeness or maybe lack of closeness in those relationships. I heard a mention of culture being an impact on how a family is defined. So culturally, there may be some components that determine who is part of a family or considered part of a family, and may not always fit that stereotypical mother, father, 2.5 children. So then there's this idea of, is blood really thicker than water? And so we have some very kind of ingrained beliefs around the closeness of family, and how family that's blood related to us should or is maybe more important than others in our life. Mm-hmm. So I'd be interested to hear from some of you, of either personal experiences with this concept of blood being thicker than water, or maybe even some thoughts on where the saying came from or why the saying is so prevalent.
I love this topic, so I have a lot to say. Sorry, I'm jumping in. Shanta.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Blood is thicker than water. I believe it comes from because your family is supposed to be the one that takes care of you, nurture you, not hurt you, protect you. And, water being your friends and outsiders are the ones that's supposed to be the ones you look out for. But in reality, your family sometimes are the ones that, and I'm talking from experience as a person of product of molestation from my uncle, my mother's brother. I thought family was supposed to protect you, but then when I was put in foster care, I didn't have those issues in the home, in some of the homes. So it was kind of like, no, family is not thicker than, blood is not thicker than water. Blood hurts you sometimes more than water will hurt you. Sad to say, but my take on it, again, family is not. It's not, you know what I mean? Like, it's not who they're supposed to protect you. They're not supposed to hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for me,
and I think. I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, for me, I also think about it as to a sense is a spiritual connection, whether for some of us who are adopted, or whether it's just that humanitarian connection that I have with my family that I'm adopted into. I may not necessarily connect with them bloodline-wise, but as far as like spiritual connection or a certain kind of like human connection, I think that also kind of plays a very important role in my relationship to how I identify with them.
I think that's an excellent point. We often do have expectations of safety in relationships. Individuals who may come into a family by differing means, be it adoption, foster care, may have a different view of that based upon previous life experiences. So our understanding of family may come from very early on in our experiences, maybe the family we're born into, and that may set the stage for how we define family moving forward based upon those experiences. So I'd like to just take a moment now to move, there we go, to talk a little bit about the shift of family. So we have two main concepts here, the family of origin and family of choice. And this is going to be our focus of the rest of our discussion today is we've talked a little bit about how we typically define family, and these generally fall under our family of origin. That would be the mother, father, and children, being the common inference when people make when listening to someone talk about their family. This is oftentimes the family in which one was raised, and it can be made up of biologically related individuals. There may be some ties through adopted families, but we generally have a family in which we feel was the root of our origin. And then we can also have what we call a family of choice. And family of choice is the concept of constructing a family outside of those blood ties in order to find belongingness. So for some individuals, there may be a rift between their family of origin and their family of choice. There may be experiences in their family of origin that lead them to a family of choice. For others, they may continue to function very healthily in a family of origin, but also seek out a family of choice for a variety of reasons. For example, in the drag community, families are constructed, most notably in the form of drag mothers and daughters. Not unlike many other families or families of origin, in these created families, drag children take on the last name of their drag mother when performing. So that doesn't necessarily speak to there being a disconnect of one's family of origin, but more so a development of a family of choice for that sense of belonging. And in the drag community, family is a tight bond. We also see this happen oftentimes in incarcerated environments. So someone who may be incarcerated, specifically we find it more with females that are incarcerated, they begin to develop these family units. They want to belong to something, and within the prison system, their family of origin may not be present. Their family of origin may not be there for them to continue to develop, even if their family of origin visits them. A family of choice is somebody who can be present on a day-to-day basis and have their back, support them, look out for them, protect them, be an ear for them to speak to, be a shoulder to cry on, but much more present in their life than family of origin. So there's various reasons why an individual may develop a family of choice, but it's important for us as clinicians to understand this particular shift, that when someone speaks of family, it's important to clarify, are they speaking of a family of origin, and what does that family of origin look like? Or might they be speaking of a family of choice, and then what does that family look like? So next is heteronormative language. So even as we've been sitting here talking about kind of our typical family makeup, we've been talking about the idea of a mother, father, a husband, and wife. And so we want to be mindful that when an individual is speaking of the makeup of their family, that we're careful not to assume that when a client talks about a spouse, that they're talking about someone of the opposite gender. We want to be mindful when someone's speaking of parents, that we don't make the assumption that their parents might be a male and a female. We want to be mindful that individuals may speak of other important relationships like an aunt, but that aunt might have guardianship of the individual. And so it's really important that we don't just fall into the behavior of, well, it's always a man, a woman, and 2.5 children, into seeing that there may be alternative makeups within the family. Some other examples of heteronormative language would be asking who the real mother is when speaking to a 2-female couple with children, inferring that marriage and relationships are only between 2 people, and assuming everyone was raised by 2 parents, specifically a mother and father, without regard for other family makeup. And I have an example of an experience with heteronormative approach. And at my children's school, they did a event called Donuts with Dad. And while understandably they're working to support and foster relationships between children and their fathers, this really left many children feeling outside of the norm because maybe they don't have a father for a variety of reasons. We could have individuals whose family makeup doesn't include a father. Maybe it's a female head of household, single parent. Maybe it's an individual living with their grandparents or in foster care. Maybe it's an individual whose father is currently away for work or deployed for the military. But it certainly causes those children to feel like if I don't have a father, then I'm not good enough to participate in this particular experience. So we noticed at my children's school that the general attendance was that of males with presumably their biological children. It seemed kind of easier for those individuals to blend in to the event, and yet there were some that it was assumed that the individual was there with a grandchild or a relative, or we even had a few females who attended with children. And so it really kind of brought to light the need for understanding language when we're referring to these events and the message that it sends to children. Also noted was that when this event was over and pictures were posted on the school's social media page, the only individuals posted on the social media page were those that presented as a male father figure with their children. None of the other alternative family makeups were highlighted in pictures of the event. Also important to note with heteronormative language is that it leads to assumptions of how families are constructed. And as with my example of donuts with dad, is it can cause those who don't fit into that assumption to feel as if there's something wrong with their family. Heteronormative language also provides a limited definition of what a family actually is. And in contrast to what may be assumed as a traditional family, a study conducted by Dufresne identified 32 different types of families. So Ash, if you would like, you can share a couple of examples from that list of 32 different types of families from the Dufresne study.
Sure. Sure. What was interesting about Dufresne's study is he is a sociologist and not necessarily a psychologist. And that's important to note because when he looks at families, he looks at it from a societal standpoint of function. And so for a family to be successful, that means it is functional. And these families were constructed of multi-generational families. These were single parent households where someone was raised either by only a mother or only a father. These were families that were constructed by being raised by siblings who were much older. These were families that were members of the LGBT community, whether it was lesbian mothers or gay fathers. So those are just a few different types of families that were listed. Some people even identified families outside the realm of, as we were talking about, just having two people in a relationship, for it to be the concept of it takes a village to raise a child. So those are just a few of the different families that were used or that people identified in this study. Dufresne did not limit himself to just like checking a box. That was how he identified so many different types of functional families, was giving people the opportunity to define family.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ash. So when we talk of family of choice, there is a cultural significance and symbolic meaning behind constructing a unit in which one belongs. And so understanding that an individual getting to choose who is part of their family can not only be culturally significant, but it can certainly be personally significant. So being able to choose who I want to consider part of my family, who I want to be within that inner family circle, doesn't necessarily have to be limited to those that are related to me by blood. Strong families provide a foundation for society, and it's the functionality, not the structure, that's important. And so this also came from that Dufresne study, is that it's not necessarily the falling into the realm of the mother, father, 2.5 children that's important, but it's the way in which a family functions that meets the needs of the individual. Here on the slide, we have a picture of Stitch, a Disney character, and it says Ohana means family, and family means nobody gets left behind or forgotten. I have a very unique family situation myself, in that I am married to another female, and we have 3 children. We have 10-year-old twin boys and an almost 5-month-old son. In addition to that, our family includes my ex-husband. He is not the biological father of any of the children, yet he has taken on a very strong role of being a father figure to the children. He has embraced this, and while we are all very accepting of it, he has chosen this as part of his family of choice. And about a year ago, came back for a visit. He's an over-the-road trucker, so he came back for a visit, and I noticed on the back of his calf was a new tattoo, and it was a watercolor tattoo of Stitch, and it had the saying of Ohana. And so I sat down and had a conversation with him about it, and he really talked about how, growing up, he had some situations in his family of origin that left him alone with his mother and really relying on one another, and that it was important to him as he grew up to really learn to define family as being those that you are welcoming into your life, that you continue to maintain relationships with. So while for some it may seem a little odd that our family looks the way it looks, especially given the fact that he and I were previously married, no longer are, and I've since remarried, the construct of family can kind of extend beyond those borders and can include individuals within our family that wouldn't typically be thought of as being family members. Next, we're going to move on to discussion of Maslow, and I will turn it over to Ash.
So when we start looking at Maslow, a lot of things that you guys brought up were extremely important as far as safety being provided by family, which actually is in the hierarchy. So when we look at Maslow's hierarchy, even though it's really not a linear concept, you have physiological needs, safety needs, belongingness and love needs, esteem needs, and then self-actualization. And right square in the middle, Maslow kind of posits that after one meets their physiological needs, they'll seek out their safety needs. And once those two needs have been met, they will search out for belongingness and love needs. And this is your intimate relationships and friends. One thing that I thought was very interesting about this is that it wasn't necessarily limited to seeking out love and belongingness with family. That wasn't something that was kind of put into this concept. So these needs play a significant role in how we construct or why we construct our families. Without this construction, you run the risk of how am I trying to say this? Excuse me. Without the construction of a family, you've disrupted your hierarchy. So once you have your safety needs met, if you're not establishing that belongingness of love, it's going to be even more difficult to get to the esteem needs and reach this self-actualization if you believe that self-actualization is something to be achieved. So that's how Maslow starts fitting into this. And then when we move to the next slide, we kind of start looking at why people need to create families. First of all, familial acceptance is a strong protective factor promoting higher self-esteem, social support, and overall well-being. Again, this kind of can go right back to our hierarchy because it's promoting that esteem. It's a need to find a place within a group, seeking out that love and belongingness with others beyond the constraints of blood ties can be done in response to adverse childhood life experiences. This can be done in response to traumatic events. And so when you guys kind of think about this concept of creating a family, who is likely to want to create a family?
I would say everyone, right? Or maybe.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason why anyone can't do it. You're exactly right. When we start looking at individuals who have deceased parental figures, people that are single without children, orphans, foster children, the LGBTQ community, these are all individuals who might want to create their own family because, again, one thing that was entered into the chat box, I know that Jennifer had mentioned who adopts you are people considered family. And then there was also a comment from Ashley Curtis that says, you know, a family is a close and personal support system. And so when you think about these different individuals, that's what they're all seeking out, is that close support system, that love and belongingness. And so staying on with the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, specifically, we're going to talk about how it affects the LGBTQ community. And that's because they outscore their heterosexual counterparts in every ACEs subgroup. In just a little background information, a score of 4 or higher on ACEs leads to adverse events throughout the lifespan. But this kind of relates because, as the name would give way, these are adverse childhood experience or adverse child experiences. So these are going to take place in childhood. So you're talking about physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, exposure to domestic violence, familial mental illness, substance abuse, parental separation, and parental incarceration. And so whether it's conscious or unconscious, people are seeking out love and belongingness throughout their lives. And so when you start thinking about ACEs scores, people that score high in these subcategories deal with unhealthy familial relationships. And so that can lead to a drive to seek out that love and belongingness beyond the constraints of one's family of origin. And going back to what Dr. Crowley had mentioned about this not meaning that you eliminate your family of origin from your life, more so it is looking to find the functional within the dysfunction, if that makes sense. And so we start talking about rejection because a lot of your trauma in the LGBTQ community can be found around rejection. When we started talking about that family love and acceptance being a protective factor, it's a huge protective factor for LGBTQ individuals. And so with that being said, the face of rejection is, 40% of homeless youth identify as LGBTQ plus. And this rejection has the same effect as an increased ACEs score. You have an increased risk of suicide, ideology, attempts, and completion. You have higher mortality rates, and these mortality rates aren't necessarily related to suicide. These mortality rates are related to increased risky behaviors. This is smoking, drinking, and an increased likelihood of substance use and abuse. And so clients that aren't out to their families may face this risk of rejection. And so it's important to understand the likelihood of loss in the home. You have to understand that they may lose not only their home, but if they don't live at home and you're trying to force a relationship with a client and their family of origin, and they're not ready to be out, they may lose financial support and or contact with siblings as a result of coming out. You have to respect where the client is in the coming out process and their motivation for withholding this information from their family. And if a client cannot trust their family of origin with coming out in order to foster love and belongingness, it's necessary to recognize being a part of the community and building a family can help meet those needs. Because to share, just from a personal perspective, there's no lonelier place to be than feel like you're surrounded by people that aren't like you or that don't understand. And so when you can engage with and build a community that understands you, it really fosters a lot of self-acceptance and helps promote those esteem needs. And even in the event that an individual comes out and is accepted by their family, there's still a certain understanding that comes along with building relationships in the LGBTQ community. So even with the most accepting of families, there's still this need for people that belong to the LGBTQ community to also find love and belongingness within the community. And then, it's recognizing the other, for instance, one thing that is interesting is in the LGBTQ community, it's not uncommon to say family as an identifier. And so you don't just say, hey, that's my family. A lot of times if you're out and you see someone else that's a part of the community, it's not uncommon to say to whoever's with you, that's family. And like you look at each other and like it's a term of endearment. It's I see you. And so that's kind of how that idea of family is really ingrained into the LGBTQ community. And so when we continue talking about rejection and the forms of rejection, there's some different forms of rejection that I kind of recognized. And these forms of rejection are tolerance, rejection of the lifestyle, rejection of the person, and explanations. Tolerance is not synonymous with acceptance. Tolerance is tolerating a person, and most people don't want to just be tolerated. Families may reject the lifestyle. So they may reject the fact that the individual is a member of the LGBTQ community, but they don't reject the person. It's like, you can come around, just don't act like you're gay when you're here, or just don't talk about it, to grandma. Um, and then you have rejection of the person. That's where we start going back and looking at the statistics of 40% of homeless youth being homeless. That's rejection of the person due to their LGBTQ lifestyle. And then there's this idea of explanations. You have to explain to family members and others about the individual accompanying them to events, and it's the constant coming out. And so you're always looking at these different forms of rejection from other people, because every time you show up to an event with your significant other and someone doesn't know, it's constantly having to come out again. And being in the closet to avoid rejection and explaining why an individual does not have a boyfriend or girlfriend is very common for people that are not out to their families. That's a stressor. It's, it's Thanksgiving and we're going to go to, so and so's house, but then you're having to explain to every aunt and uncle that wants to know why you're not dating or why you don't have somebody, like, oh, well, I just don't want to see anybody right now. And so, these these ideas of rejection kind of play into the stressors. And again, that need to build a family that you can be your authentic self with. And it's really important to note, while we're going through all of this, that, none of this is a choice. And again, that's something common when you start thinking about the rejection of lifestyle and rejection of person is, this idea that it's a choice, or that, if you can choose to be this way, you can choose not to be. And especially in the bisexual or biaffectional community, that's very, very common. You should be able to choose to be with, said gender over other said gender. And then I want to highlight the difference between passive support, active support, and ally. So for me, passive support, it is very similar to this idea of tolerance. It's like, I'll tolerate you. Maybe it's kind of an acceptance, but it's not actively doing anything outside of that. And then you have active support, where you're actively supporting the person you love. And then you have this idea of being an ally. And as an ally, it's, boots on the ground, really showing that you're supportive of the community, you're supportive not only of your child that you love or of your family member that you love, but you're supportive of the community as a whole. And so then, just to kind of move to wrapping up, the biggest thing that we wanted to get, or for people to understand from this presentation, is that there's a need to understand, or we wanted you guys to understand people's need for love and belongingness, and that can explain why people who choose those who are considered families. And that rejection and trauma may lead individuals to seek out that love and belongingness from people who are not in their family of origin. Responses to ACEs may or not be a conscious survival technique, seeking out that love and belongingness as a way to literally survive. And then having a supportive and accepting family is the most positive protective factor reported by LGBTQ plus individuals. Creating one gives them a chance to make what they may not have. And so when you think about this idea of supportive family being a huge protective factor, creating what you don't have can certainly lead to a more positive overall well-being.
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so great job, guys. So you spoke a little bit about using inclusive language and refraining from assumptions. How can counselors advocate for diverse families on a larger macro level?
I mean, personally, I think it's looking outside of, if you're not a member of the community, kind of look outside of what you're doing. So for instance, the Donuts for Dad story. One active thing to do is not to just have to be a member of the LGBTQ community to say, oh, well, this is a little off, but to say, as a, heterosexual individual, or to look at it and say, hey, this isn't really right. And so it's looking at your forms and saying, well, why is there only a space for mother, father? And recognizing the need for, maybe we could put blank, blank.
And I'll kind of piggyback off of what Ash said, Jennifer, and say, when my children are enrolled in school, they have 3 legal guardians. And those legal guardians include myself, my wife, and my ex-husband, who is the father on the twins' birth certificate. So when we try to fill out a form to denote our family, it becomes rather difficult because they often only have mother and father. They don't have mother, mother, father. They don't have parent 1, parent 2. They don't even have guardian 1 and guardian 2. And so while this year we moved to a new school district, so we're kind of starting from scratch, in previous years we encountered this issue in our county. And we actually went to the school board and had a conversation with them about their forms and how non-inclusive they were, and not just of LGBT families, but also of those foster families, of those families where grandparents are raising children, or where the dynamics might not fit the standard mother-father component. And we advocated for some changes. And while it wasn't perfect, our county did make some changes into their forms. And it allows a greater number of individuals to feel included.
Yeah.
Other questions?
While you didn't address it directly, Dr. Crowley and Ash, I think this also applies to interracial families, which is a topic near and dear to my heart. And that, you have to choose one race when you choose the family, and it doesn't give you the option to choose multiple. And I think that that's something that I've become very attuned to, is the, acknowledging that families come in all different colors, and that's awesome too.
Thank you, Dr. LA, and that is a great point. Many of you guys know that I raised my nephew from the time he was 10, and he's now 22. And my nephew is multiracial, and so often he has never called me mother. I have a very unusual nickname, but it's not mom in any way. And so when I would encounter issues that needed me to be in contact with the school when he was in school, it was very uncomfortable to have to always explain to them who I was, my relationship to him, and why I had rights to this particular individual. And oftentimes we were very dismissed because we are of different races. And so, if he was waiting in the front office for me to come pick him up and I walked in, there was never an assumption or even a thought that this might actually be somebody that I would be there to be picking up. And so having to address anything outside of the stereotypical leave it to beaver type of family can be troubling and difficult for some individuals. And so, Dr. Ellie, you bring up a very good point that it is about different races. It is about different religions. We have many families in which there's multiple religions reflected within that family, as well as even just an understanding of ethnicity, geographical backgrounds. I mean, the list can go on. And, we certainly don't want to exclude the intersectionality of those as well. So there's a lot of important components in this that we have to consider when someone is making up, developing, or has a concept of what their family of choice is.
For me, I hear a lot that there seems to be a lot of value for the idea of choice, whether it comes from the individual choosing their family or how counselors think about choice when it comes to individuals who might be part of the LGBTQ plus community or come from an interracial family or an adoptive family, and how to speak about choice and the person um, deciding for themselves how they, I guess, define that for themselves. I was wondering if you did any research on the idea of choice and how counselors can help clients when they are when they don't maybe necessarily want to choose or need to choose, but are told that they have to choose to a certain degree, whether it's social norms or just by personal relationships that they have.
Giovanni, I'll jump in because I actually have quite a few different um, sort of questions within your question. And one of the things I think we want to make sure that you walk away from our presentation with as attendees is that as counselors, you have a responsibility to not only understand that families may look differently from person to person, but also understand that individuals have an option of choosing a family, not choosing a family, being independent, and that we don't ever want to push that on a client. We don't want to force them to talk about why their family looks the way it does. We don't want to, question their development of family. We may just want to have a conceptualization of what their family, or even if we want to make it broader and call it a support system or a network, or connectivity for belongingness. Because some may even have some trauma related to the label of family, and we want to be mindful of that. Ash, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add in that there's, as far as research goes, there's a lot of different research that if you are looking for like what makes a family functional, there's a lot of different sociological studies out. And the Dufresne study, which we can get you the link to, I can put it in the chat box, is a really great sort of definition of family, in my opinion, because where there's no all-encompassing definition, again, that's what he's looking at, is that functional aspect. And so like Dr. Crowley said, like you don't want to necessarily question someone's family and why it looks the way it does, but then also to like respect that if it is functional, then really and truly, like that's at the most basic level, a family. A family is a functional support system that people are getting their needs met in. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I would chime in here too that, just a practical application as a counselor, one of the things that I did when I started my private practice is I just had blanks for race and gender and, all of these things instead of having forced choices. And, I've had clients comment that was really appreciated, that they got to define who they were in the language that they felt most appropriately described their situation. And so I think that's just a very simple thing that we can do that can help our clients feel included and have choice.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to one of the conversations that I'm pretty sure I had it with Dr. Crowley, with this concept of other, where some forms are trying to, I guess, become more inclusive, multiracial. Sometimes can fall under this category of other. And when you really sort of break that down, it's like, is that really being inclusive? So a lot of research, even on different websites that I went to doing another project, it was if you wanted to find certain communities, if you wanted to find the LGBTQ community, if you wanted to find the African American community or the Latino or Latinx community, I should say. If you wanted to find these different communities, you had to go to their other tab. And so in a way that can almost be sort of this I guess, I hate to say it's microaggressive, but it's kind of microaggressive. Like you're not representing everyone. It's like, well, this is, all the things that constitute a family, or these are all the races that constitute race. And then there's other with a little blank if you don't fit into this. And you don't want to leave people feeling like an other, because that's almost another word for outsider.
All right, I think we're at time now, and so I do want to wrap up to allow the next group to come in and present. I want to thank everyone for coming and attending our presentation. And certainly, if you have any lingering questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to myself or Ash. We'll be more than happy to touch base with you.
Good job, guys. You did awesome. Thank you.
That's awesome.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Have a good day.
Okay, so next we have another presentation in this room. And Dr. Sully, I think I saw you log on.
Yes, ma'am. And Danita, we need to start and stop the.
Oh, that's right. Oh, goodness. Okay.